to move away from, again, that more advisor-centric model and trying to scale up past that point. And to do that, you have to transition into more systems thinking and start really creating a platform that scales.
What's up, ModelFA's David DeCelle here, CEO of ModelFA and your host of the ModelFA podcast. And I am joined here today by not only a former colleague and current collaborator, but also a good friend of mine, Jason Mirabella, who is the founder of Deliver Advice, which is a crowd-supported consulting platform dedicated to creating human-centered, high-growth, scalable financial advisory firms through strategic collaboration. And I am super pumped to have Jason here today inside of the Exchange, our community platform. He has received a lot of really great feedback on his methodology and the way that he thinks. And frankly, Jason, it's good to catch up with you and get this podcast going. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited.
Well, let's rock and roll. So, we had originally met when you were a part of ModelFA, and I actually had joined the company after you. You had then went to work with a larger RIA, and certainly correct me when I pass it over to you if I'm misspeaking here, but I believe it was a $2 billion RIA, and now you run a consulting company called Deliver Advice. But before we even get into that, and this is more so me being curious than anything, because I don't know if I had ever asked this, but before ModelFA and all that, like, what did you do? What were like your early jobs and career paths to get you to where you are now?
Yeah, I've been in the industry about 25 years. Came out of college in 2000, right in probably 2-3 months after the dot-com bubble sort of kicked off. So I felt pretty lucky to get a job coming into that job market. The first 3 years of my career was the market going straight down, which ended up being a good experience, right? Because it kind of set my expectations. In today's environment, for the better part of the last 15 years, we've been in a cyclical bull market, and to have kind of a perspective going through that first 3 years and going through the Great Recession, I think it gives me perspective on some of the work that I do, that things don't always get better. I entered my first job as an analyst at a business called the Todd Organization that worked there for 3 years as it's a business that's owned by Northwestern Mutual. They focus on executive benefits. So we did non-qualified deferred comp plans for a lot of the tech industry, larger tech industry companies, Calpine and others. And that was a great experience. I went to Principal Financial Group for a couple of years, tried to be a financial advisor, did reasonably well, but that experience was very valuable as well, because it was in an enlightenment with regard to where I didn't want to be, which was kind of a closed proprietary system, and that sort of I think because of that experience, I value independence and the independent model, and it sort of set the tone for future career decisions and being in places where, at least as a financial advisor, I could be more objective and sell product and give advice that was a little bit less conflicted. After that, went to a firm called M Financial Group, which is a large, a kind of like, you can think of it, they have a reinsurance company. They also have, they're really big into, they basically sell a lot of insurance to very wealthy people. They have a network of firms around the nation. They have a reinsurance company. They build proprietary insurance products. And I was an analyst and focused on both plan design and their Coley and Bowley. I was on their Coley and Bowley committee, just based on my background. Went to work, and then from there, Great Recession happened, and then went back into the RIA space. Kind of cut my teeth both on the sales side and operationally for about 5 or 6 years. Started a business called Henfroof, which for 3 years, which it was like in 2014, which was kind of like an online only kind of one of the around that time, everybody was getting interested in this idea of delivering, advice kind of digitally. So it was kind of half life coaching, half financial planning. All my clients were kind of around the US, had very few clients actually locally. And that's when I met Patrick Brewer. And that sort of kicked off a 8-year period where I met you, started working at Brewer Consulting, which now is ModelFA. And then we, as you know, we worked to build up SurePath Wealth Management, which was purchased by WealthSource Partners. And that brings me to today, which is after my exit with WealthSource Partners, I started Deliver Advice. So I don't know if you wanted all of that, but it's a pretty long. It's been a pretty long career. 25 years. It feels pretty weird actually to say that out loud. But I think every place that I've been, I've learned a lot, and I feel like it's prepared me for the work that I do now.
And just from for credibility purposes, what was the size of WealthSource when they got acquired, and what was your role over there?
So initially, at SurePath Wealth Management, I was Chief Platform Officer. So I basically built the platform for the advisors. So, compliance and just anything related to compliance, service delivery, operations. My interest is in building a platform in which the advisors can plug into that solves hard problems for them so that they can go out into the marketplace, get more clients, do more sales and marketing, and sort of do things that lead to the outcomes that they want, and not do the things that lead to the outcomes they don't want, which is sit in a chair doing operational tasks and operating through complexity as it relates to how do I orient all of this stuff, all these things that I need to worry about. How do I do that in a way that is both effective for the client, creates a good work experience for myself, and allows me to grow my business? So that's really been the problem that I've been really focused on for the last 8 years, is figuring out how firms can really create that great work experience and those great systems, connect that to strategic planning and their aspirations, and make it easier for advisors to do work and thrive. I'm also a big believer that it's not just about the advisor, it's about the organization. So a lot of the stuff that I've been focused on during the last 3 years is trying to get out of this advisor-centric mindset and evolving the industry, or at least the firms that want to make that jump, to more of an enterprise mindset, which is take the focus off of the advisor, which I believe most of the consulting industry is focused on, is for the betterment of the advisor, turn it to the betterment of the business. And through that mindset, you're going to create a better experience and better financial outcomes for the advisor. I think I've talked a lot about this, where I think a lot of the struggles that advisor are having in the industry that have been persisting for multiple decades is a result of the orientation of the legacy business model, which is advisor is here. The goal, the business is basically creating a support system to support that person. And that creates a lot of conflict. It creates a lot of putting that advisor in places that they shouldn't be. It creates a lot of issues around putting things on the advisor that they may not have the skill set for. So I'm trying to empower the advisor to obviously do the things they want, and then create an organization that thrives to, if that's kind of crafted to the betterment of all stakeholders.
So then, and I agree with all that stuff and hear you. Back to just a quick punch list item. What was the size of WealthSource and what did you do over there?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I go off on tangents, by the way. So I think, well, when I exited, which was about 7 or 8 months ago, I think it was 2.1 billion, 2.3 billion, somewhere in that neighborhood. It was a platform for the last 3 or 4 years, very consistent with what a lot of firms are trying to do, which is grow non-organically and sort of navigating through the complexity of that and all the things that come with bolting on, separate businesses onto and aggregating all these businesses together, which so it's a hard problem. So so that, and they ended up selling to One Digital, and here we are. So yeah, the answer is 2.1 or 2.3 billion of AUM.
And you were the chief platform officer over there, if I'm not mistaken, right?
No, well, I was chief platform officer for the first 8 months after they acquired Surpath Wealth Management, and then they made me COO. So I was COO for about 3 years.
Cool. So when I think about deliver advice, it's actually very complementary to what we're doing at the exchange. So we built the exchange as a way to aggregate as much of the consulting IP out there for purposes of the advisor being able to consume that content in those courses and be a part of a community that is made up of advisors who are all looking to accomplish similar things. Whereas deliver advice is more so something similar in that, as it's worded, crowd supported. It's crowd supported for the deliverance of advice and help with implementation to solve those problems. So it's not as much a DIY model as much as it is a awareness model to start of, hey, here are the problems, here are the issues, here are the opportunities. Oh, and by the way, the team is bigger than me, Jason, and I have trusted industry partners that are going to come in here and transform your business. Do I have that fairly accurate?
Yeah, for the most part. I might say it in a little bit different way. I think the main goal of the platform, there's three key components. One of which is kind of this crowd supported idea of crowd supporting the bringing together of consultants and thought leadership and the right experts to solve the specific problems that firms face, right? But let me zoom back a little bit. It is foundationally set upon a philosophy or a methodology for how to build an enterprise level business. We call this blocks. So the idea is blocks is basically a 9 groups of 9 areas of an enterprise level business that come together and create the business that you want. These are areas like strategy and growth, platform, client experience, workflow, enablement, connectivity, management, and culture. And the reason why I sort of start here is because I believe that if you don't have a philosophy or a methodology, they don't have a framework for which they are working from, right? So foundationally, I want to be like, let's agree that this is the way that we are going to grow your business, right? So, and that's the blocks methodology. By doing that, it creates an interesting opportunity to collaborate as an industry, because one of the biggest issues another issue that's happening within firms is that they are very disconnected as they get bigger. They become more siloed, more disconnected, and it sort of illuminates the connectivity between all of the incremental decisions that you're making in a firm, right? So, strategic decisions, how that is connected to your operations, how changes to your processes and workflows affects your compliance systems and, operations and all of the things, your management methodology, how all the things affect your culture, so again, this is the most important piece, I would say, of deliver advice, which is agreement on the strategy. It's almost like EOS, but industry native and expanding to all the areas that's relevant to the advice business. From there, I use that to do what you just said, which is bring in in the areas that I or my team isn't an expert in, to align to that methodology and that delivery system that we've created to create a cohesive outcome for the firm, right? Because there's an issue that if you bring in somebody that's really good at process, they don't have any context to what's going on across the firm, right? So the methodology solves that problem. If we can bring a process in and they have context to all the other things that are happening in the business, that's a much more effective initiative within the firm. And it also allows like a COO or an integrator to understand all of the connected parts and the impact and the effect of that smaller initiative to the larger firm, right? So that's sort of the premise is, let's agree on methodology and the philosophy for which we're growing an enterprise level business. And then let's orient ourselves to improve those blocks to get the firms to the outcomes that they're looking for, right? To create kind of like a systems approach to building and growing an enterprise level firm.
So it almost like you had referenced earlier in the conversation around how a lot of firms are looking to grow inorganically through acquisition. There was a client that I was working with, very, very large firm, about 15 billion in assets. And what I noticed, which I would imagine, it hits right on the head of the culture block, and then obviously other blocks as well. But what I realized in working with them is they grew so fast inorganically, is they became sort of like a Franken firm, so to speak, where not only were the different advisor teams disconnected, but the different functions of the business were disconnected as well. So I've seen this problem firsthand, and the challenge in solving it until now, of course, with what you're doing, is that the RIA, the firm owner, and their team would be tasked with trying to coordinate all these different specialists for different areas of the business, whereas someone like you can come in and essentially do that on their behalf and bring in the appropriate parties to help transform their company. I guess I'm curious to know, when does this potentially become a problem? So the problem that you solve, when does it show itself? Is there an inflection point in terms of a number of clients or a certain amount of AUM or a number of employees and stakeholders? Like when does this become something that needs to be addressed?
I think the basics of the structure are relevant at any level, but the operational complexity starts kind of showing around the 500 to 750 million of AUM mark, right? Like things get very complex. Every area of the business, the risk of doing something bad in one area of the business gets, more leveraged as you grow. So I would say it starts around there where people start looking for ways to move away from, again, that more advisor-centric model, and trying to scale up past that point. And to do that, you have to transition into more systems thinking, and start really creating a platform that scales. This is really a methodology to do that. So, as far as people that I add the most value for, it's people around that level that want to make the jump to thinking to a more enterprise mindset. And then also for enterprises that want to do better and create a structure around getting to the next level. So those are kind of two of my sweet spots. Yeah. So, and I've got some very specific thoughts about M&A and why the industry as a whole is getting some bad outcomes. And it's a problem with, you have 30 to 40 years of legacy where advisors that build their businesses around themselves, those are what I would call advisor-dependent businesses. You've got the buyers that are looking to buy those businesses and get a return on their capital and scale and create scale by aggregating a bunch of those businesses together to create a more valuable organization. There is a huge conflict between those mindsets, right? Because the advisor comes into an environment where they're used to autonomy, they're used to, a certain way of orienting their operations that is much different than the way that a business needs to orient itself to create scale to make that aggregation profitable. So during the honeymoon phase, they're talking about, it's all, positivity and, because you're basically talking about a liquidity event for the seller, which is a great event for the seller. The platform is typically overpromising what they can deliver on the upside. So there's a lot of optimism. Unfortunately, when you drop that into the platform and you get through the honeymoon phase, that conflict doesn't go away, right? Because what the platform needs to do is create systems to create centralization, to create and deliver centralized services, and to create some alignment on all of those advisors coming into platform and how they do business, or they're not going to scale. Otherwise, you create, I use the terminology as well, Franken Firms, a bunch of businesses that sit on, a larger RIA that are all doing their own thing. But that, number one, is very hard to scale. And number two, it's very risky for the business because those client relationships are owned by the advisor, regardless of whether you sold your business to that, whether you bought the business. The fact that if the advisor walks and a huge amount of those clients go with them, that presents a huge risk to the business, and in my opinion, one of the main things that aggregators should be doing is finding ways, number one, to create scale and to get away from that Franken Firm model, but also, find ways to de-risk the book, to go to a more teams approach to service delivery and get the individual advisor and make them more as a member of the team, and to create a succession plan for the future and move it to and spread out the responsibilities of service delivery across the team so that they don't have that ongoing risk across their firm. Because, people are paying huge multiples for these businesses, and, it doesn't take a lot of client exits or a bad, a relationship with the seller going bad or being disgruntled before you can run into huge problems. So this is an area that I think about a lot, and I think Deliver Advice is uniquely positioned to solve. It's easier said than done because you're dealing with a lot of political factors and, you know, dealing with a seller that has built up a business over decades, and you've got, you know, PE involved and all of this stuff. Well, if we can bring those stakeholders together and get them to agree that this is the best way forward, like this is the philosophy or the system that we're going to use to grow the business to everybody's betterment, now we have a path forward, right? We can manage those risks. We can create scale in these aggregators and the, you know, 4P and some of these larger RAs that are buying firms. But if that's not done, then you're basically setting up for when the market pulls back or these multiples contract, that you're going to have a bunch of firms that are going out and looking for the greater fool to basically reduce the, you know, solve the problem that they just created for themselves of buying all these firms that are now far less valuable than they purchased them for, right? So that hasn't happened yet, but you can kind of see articles coming out starting to say, you know, 50% of people are, you know, aren't happy with, you know, with their transitions a year later, or that sort of thing. Or you can see, you know, a lot of exits, and it's because it's total chaos. You know, it's chaos when, like, the speed at which some of these organizations are growing and the complexity related to these integrations at scale is a very hard problem to solve. And it's just not a game of like, I can source capital and I can pay for these firms. Like, long term, this is a marathon, right? You've got to have a system to actually monetize or to create a return on your investment. And most of these platforms aren't set up to do that, you know, and the good ones are really thriving, but most people, because most of the firms are struggling with this issue. So it's one that I think about, and one that I hope to be helpful in solving.
So one of the things I want to ask as a way to sort of create an actionable takeaway for folks from this podcast is, and I know this is going to be difficult to answer, so good luck. But what are one or two things some of these larger firms can do today to start to address the problem? And I'll give one answer, which is call you. But before they do that, what are one or two things that they can do today to start to address or be aware of these things? Are there certain exercises they can do? Are there certain functions of the business that they can take a look at to evaluate? Like, what is something actionable that they could do?
Stop firefighting. You know, like, I think it all comes down to, you need to get your leadership together and create and get alignment on the way or the approach that you're taking to make your business better. You need to connect everybody in the firm. So the blocks methodology at Deliver Advice is one way to do that, right? But otherwise, you're going to face the same issues that most companies face as they grow, which is, I have this problem, I'm going to solve this problem, and then the next 12 to 24 months is managing to the fires that created, and because of lack of connectivity and thought about how that one thing that you fixed affected all of the other areas of the business, and they're doing that reactively. So it starts with good strategic planning and really determining, what are my priorities? What are my aspirations? What is the company that we want to become? You know, what's our value system? What's our vision? And then creating a framework to get to those outcomes. And if you don't have that, it's just going to be firefighting, right? It's just going to be, and that can also, firefighting can also disrupt into or devolve into political unrest and disempowered teams and bad culture. And like, there are levels to this. That's sort of like, if leadership does not have a roadmap, that tends to translate into bad outcomes down line. and they get worse and worse. And then you start trying to solve problems by buying firms, and then,
Just
because you can't
perpetuate
scale
the
organically or find good people, and then it makes it worse. And then, executive exit, like it just, there's a path where things don't go well if you don't do this work. You know what I mean? So specific answer is have a method or a philosophy before you start making strategic decisions, because then those strategic decisions are very easy. And then you can go into initiatives with a much better understanding of what that actually means to the firm, what resources you need to put towards those initiatives, and how you can manage those initiatives so they're not disruptive to other areas of the business while you're doing them, or as little disruptive. Change is disruptive in nature, but that would be my one recommendation, if as a starting point.
Awesome. So one of the questions that we ask all of our guests on the podcast as a way to distill a reading list for all of our listeners is a book that's had an impact on you. And the one that that came to mind to you is called The Advantage: Why Organizational Health Trumps Everything Else in Business, written by Jason Mirabella. Patrick Lencioni. Why'd you pick that book?
I'm just attracted to books in general that speak to the importance of organizational health and culture to the long-term health and outcomes of an organization. If you have teams that feel disempowered, they feel like they're disconnected from leadership, you cannot, it is very hard to grow in those environments, particularly, in today's world, and really in the next 10 to 20 years. I think it's going to be mission critical to really solve this issue related to work experience and work management. My primary KPI is not anything related to financials. While those are important, obviously, and those are included in my work, the primary KPI is actually work experience. How does it feel to wake up every morning and do your work? How easy is it? Have you defined how the way that you're collaborating with teams? Have you connected leadership to your teams? Have you, how does the organization feel? What's the vibe? Because if you start there, if you start with work experience and you build good systems and you build good communication to optimize for that KPI, the back channeling disappears, you retain better employees, you attract better employees, your leadership feels more empowered, all the good things happen, and all the KPIs that most people are focused on get better. And as this new generation comes into the workforce, they're not going to put up with this ivory tower, hierarchical BS. It's just not going to happen. So why not get in front of it and say, there needs to be clear, there needs to be somewhat of a hierarchy, but your ability to make the organization feel flat and connected is directly related and feel good, and an environment where people are empowered, equitably compensated, expectations are clear. That's the goal, in my opinion. Everything else falls into place from there. And that book particularly and other books related to that space is something that I'm, very attracted to. And I'm very selective about the business books that I read, because I think there's a lot of garbage out there, but a lot of stuff that's not relevant to what my values or belief systems. And this stuff to me is very important and applicable in all industries and all specific, definitely in our industry for sure.
Love it. Well, Jason, if folks are curious about learning more regarding what you do or interested in working with you, what's the best way to get in touch?
Well, they can go to deliveradvice.com, and you know, they'd sign up for my email list. They can also contact me there. Frankly, you know, I think LinkedIn, I try to be personal and accessible, and I respond to every direct message on LinkedIn. So, you know, LinkedIn or my website would be the best places to get in touch.
Awesome. Well, Jason, it's always a pleasure. I appreciate your time, and for everyone tuning in, I appreciate your time and attention as well. Jason, thank you for hopping on.
Thanks, Dave.
See ya.